I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, we examine one of the received truths in British Columbia, that one of our economic advantages is that BC offers businesses and industry a plentiful supply of hydroelectric energy at reasonable cost. What could be a better pitch? Clean energy to run your enterprise. In fact, Premier Eby has had press conferences highlighting the government's demand that new mines, LNG, data centers will be powered by electricity. Sounds pretty appealing in a time of climate awareness. But is it the reality? A couple of hard facts. For the third year in a row, BC has not produced enough electricity to even serve our own current needs, let alone all of these new initiatives. That's right. We've been importing electricity. And besides that, according to Energy Futures, BC Hydro has a backlog of demands for more clean energy. So we already have an electricity deficit in our province, a queue of current requests for more permits, while at the same time we are actively encouraging new businesses to electrify, customers to buy electric cars, home heating to move away from natural gas to electric heat pumps. Realizing the impending crisis, the Premier announced last week heavy users such as AI and data centers will just have to compete for electricity through a managed process. How will that work? Like, who decides which businesses win the lottery? Barry Penner, chair of the Energy Futures Institute and a former BC cabinet minister, calls this a serious case of policy dissonance. Back with Barry in a moment. When Barry Penner and I were in government together, we moved around ministries and things. At one point, Attorney General and Minister of the Environment, which is kind of interesting, especially given your current position, because you're looking at energy uses and how it interfaces. So I was quite struck by one of your recent reports that said, hey guys, you're sitting in BC thinking, oh, you know, we've got all the electricity in the world and we're just fine. And you said, let's look at the facts.
That's true. Many British Columbians get upset when they learn that we're actually a net importer of electricity from the United States. They remember 25 years ago when BC Hydro made a lot of money around 1999 and 2000. There was an electricity crunch in California. They had a crisis. And PowerX, the trading arm of BC Hydro, made out like bandits. They made a handsome profit. We also remember that there's $200 million that they didn't pay us for. But we overlooked the fact we actually made handsomely before that happened. There was litigation. Ultimately, there were lawsuits and things were settled as a result of the high prices PowerX and others were charging, like Enron, to the state of California at that time. But that was a quarter century ago, and things have changed. Our population's grown, and our domestic production of electricity has not kept pace. And so the last 3 years, we've been a net importer of electricity, meaning we've had to count on the United States to send us electricity to keep our lights on.
I think that would surprise a lot of people. It doesn't get a headline.
It has once in a while. The government, obviously, and BC Hydro doesn't like to talk about it much. They'll point out that we still can make money trading if we can buy low and then sell high. But when you subtract the number of electrons that we're selling from the number of electrons that we're importing far more than we're selling. And it's not just for trading opportunities. According to BC Hydro's own annual report, you can look it up, page 24, page 25 of their latest annual report, came out at the end of August 2025. They break it down, and in the footnote, they say it's imported for domestic load requirements. That's the phrase, domestic load requirements. The word requirements doesn't mean optional, it means necessary. So that's why we've been a net importer.
So how did we get into this position? You talked about what it was like 25 years ago, and obviously there's some population figures and things. But you and I both remember when Site C was first being talked about, a lot of the opposition said, hey, we don't need this. Like, we're never going to need this. This is a huge boondoggle.
That is what was said. And it wasn't true then. It's certainly not true now. So you can't build just in time. Take a look at the Site C dam. It took a decade, actually more than that, to get it finished. Premier Campbell, as he then was, announced the government was going ahead with Site C in 2010 during the Olympics. And it wasn't, the last unit didn't actually go into production, start spinning the turbine, until last summer of 2025. So 15 years from, okay, let's go, to let's actually throw the last switch and get the thing running.
And so now that it's running, does that do away with the deficit?
No, it certainly helps. But for the numbers I've crunched, for 2025 to the end of the calendar year, we imported more electricity in the year than Site C would produce itself. So even with Site C coming on in the middle of last summer, we still ended up importing more than the entire Site C dam would produce in a year, in a typical year if we had normal water. And that's part of the story here. We haven't had normal water flows in British Columbia for 3 or 4 years now. And this winter's not looking very encouraging either. While we enjoyed basking in some warm sunshine last week, the truth is we probably shouldn't at this time of year, because what's happening is, or what's not happening, is snow accumulating in the mountains. We're shaping up to have a very disappointing snowpack again this year.
So how serious is this?
Well, I guess it depends who you ask. I think the government's actions indicate that they know it's serious. They might not be telling the public that. But why else would they be bypassing their own environmental assessment process only for electricity projects? Why would they short circuit that? Why would they exempt power purchase agreements that they're signing with independent power producers, which, by the way, the NDP used to be against? They were opposed to private power. That was supposed to be bad. They've now turned to the private sector, I would suggest, not out of choice, but because they realize they have to. So they've exempted those contracts from close scrutiny by the BC Utilities Commission. So there's a couple of things that they've done that I would suggest speak louder than the words themselves.
I don't know if it was you, Barry, or somebody else, but they talked about how many Site C dams it would take just to get us back in a good space.
Yeah, it wasn't me, but if you look at several of the policy commitments that the NDP government's made around, they call it Clean BC, effectively banning the use of natural gas for new residential and commercial construction, so you can't use it for heating anymore. You have to use more electricity, combined with the electric vehicle mandates, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment. You add those two things together, and you are talking about the need for multiple Site C dams equivalent in terms of new electricity generation, if we aren't going to be dependent on the United States for our electricity supply.
There's so many ironies in this conversation because, okay, on the one hand, we're saying we're going to be independent, elbows up, you know.
That's right.
We're not going to depend on the United States. And yet here we've got another set of policy issues saying we're going to electrify everything and not use natural gas to make electricity, for instance. Those don't go together.
Yeah, the polite phrase is policy incoherence. Polite company. Speaking privately, I'd probably call it something else. But yeah, so yeah, we're moving in different directions at the same time. Our policy actions are making us more dependent. And the ultimate irony is some of this electricity we're importing comes from the natural gas we are exporting. So we sell them the natural gas, they burn it to create electricity, and we buy it back as a value-added product. So they get to realize, economic benefits of transforming it into electricity, generating jobs and taxes in the United States as we buy it back.
But we are not allowed here to use our natural gas to produce electricity.
Under the Clean BC policy, BC Hydro is supposed to discontinue purchasing any natural gas generation in BC. We still have some natural gas electricity. Burrard Thermal was the old natural gas power plant near Port Moody. It's been dismantled now effectively, but there still is a 275 megawatt power plant at Campbell River called Island Generation, and it's on the bubble. Under the government's plans, that contract is supposed to expire, I think, later this year. And so BC Hydro is not supposed to renew it under the Clean BC plan. And that plant has run in periods when we've been in a real crunch. Last February, we had a cold snap. It ran throughout that cold snap, full tilt. BC Hydro said we need that electricity. And then the previous summer, during a heat wave, and when it was very dry again, and we didn't have as much water behind our dams as we would like, that plant was running full tilt to help keep the lights on. But under the Clean BC policy, we're supposed to get rid of that asset. And another irony is, BC Hydro, at the government's request, has put out a request for capacity ideas. Like how can we get more electricity that we can dispatch, not wait for the wind to blow, but that we can reliably turn on. Well, they've already got it, but under the policy, they're supposed to get rid of it. And I guess the idea is to replace it with something else. But that plant's already paid for.
Have you had any indication that they'd rethink the clean energy?
There are occasionally rumors that certain people in government are saying this doesn't make sense. Certainly the mayor of Campbell River doesn't think it makes sense. It's a significant taxpayer in the community, and he would like to see that plant remain as part of their community and the jobs that come with it. But there's been no clear indication from the government what they're planning to do, other than the existing policy is to get rid of it.
So we apply these clean energy requirements to us in BC, but we go to the states, so we don't apply the clean energy requirements to them.
Under the GHG, or greenhouse gas emissions accounting procedure, we don't count those emissions from the imported electricity. But I came across an interesting document about a week ago. Turns out the BC government is tracking that. I found it on a BC government website. It's Industrial Emissions Inventory, it's called. And if my interpretation of it is correct, in the most recent year that they have the data available, which is for 2023, the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the imported electricity was 5.3 million tons. If that was added to our provincial calculation, that would increase BC's greenhouse gas total by 8%. But we don't count it.
We're counting on this break, though, and we'll be right back. So, Barry, we presented the problem, but I'm not sure where the solution is, because we've got policies that are saying we've got to start electrifying everything, and we're already short of electricity. So where do you see the solutions? Is it going to be on the demand side or the supply side?
Both. In my view, it should be both, and that's what's been missing. The government has been telling BC Hydro, okay, go procure more electricity from the private sector. Again, if this was 10, 15 years ago, you'd be shocked by that because the NDP was opposed to private power. But anyway, they've turned to the private sector to try and generate more intermittent electricity from wind power and solar. So that's to try and help with the supply. But in the meantime, we have some levers, policy levers, to help level off the demand increase, and it's around prohibiting natural gas. If we didn't prohibit it, that would take some significant pressure off the grid in the future, and that means reducing costs for BC Hydro and therefore ratepayers. Don't take my word for it. Again, in the BC Hydro's own documents, they've actually helpfully modeled what some of these policies would mean in terms of electricity demand if the government sticks with it. And it's in their latest integrated resource plan filed with the Utilities Commission at the end of October. They've got a helpful little chart, and they break down the Clean BC policy about banning natural gas for home heating, plus something that gets less attention, the 100% efficient equipment standard, meaning certain appliances now will be prohibited. And if you combine those two policies...
Like if I've got an older appliance, or what does that mean?
Yes, you can't replace it with what you had before. So if you had a hot water tank and it goes, under their policy, you're no longer going to get a natural gas heated water tank. It'll have to be electric. So when BC Hydro modeled these numbers, you combine those two policies, the so-called zero carbon step code, which restricts the use of natural gas for new construction, plus this efficiency standard, the new equipment can't use natural gas, basically. Those two things together require 2 more Site C dams worth of electricity. So they've done the numbers.
And people, I think we all have our busy lives and we're concentrating on looking after our family and carrying on. But we think that, oh, this is an intellectual exercise over there. It's not going to affect me. But when you start to say, well, you can't use natural gas for home heating, you must use these heat pumps, electric heat pumps. And as you've just said, in other maybe some of my appliances I won't be able to replace. All of a sudden, that is personal. And yet I don't see a revolution out there saying we've got to change policy here.
There was pressure building with the federal EV mandate, for example. Prime Minister Carney announced a few days ago the government's going to jettison that strict requirement of sales. But so far, it's on the books still in British Columbia. Our provincial energy minister has said they're going to revisit it, but it actually would take an amendment that has to go to the legislature, because it wasn't done with order in council. It was done, with much fanfare in 2019, introducing the electric vehicle. It's called the Zero
Emissions
Vehicle Act, correct, ZEV, the ZEV Act. That has to be amended on the floor of the legislature, because the sales targets or requirements in BC are actually embedded right in the legislation, not in an order in council or ministerial directive, but right in the act. And so for BC right now, in this year, this model year, the sales requirement is 26%.
And where are we at?
16.5 in the latest StatsCan numbers.
So how does that penalize either individuals or companies?
So it's aimed at the manufacturers, and they will be penalized up to $20,000 per vehicle that they sell that's over the allowed threshold. So if 26% have to be zero emissions, I guess that means 74% can be otherwise. It can be your standard internal combustion engine vehicle. So if you sell anything more than 74%, then you can attract this $20,000 penalty for each car that exceeds that threshold, that amount. Or you can buy credits from your competitors who may have sold more than 74% or than 26% zero emission cars. There's very few companies that sell more than that, and it would be Tesla and maybe some Chinese manufacturers.
And it's so amazing, all the little complexities that don't get talked about in the headlines. And so most people wouldn't realize, for instance, even hybrid cars aren't counted.
Not under the provincial and the federal one until Prime Minister Carney made his announcement. So there's a lot of stuff that came around that federal announcement, but really at the heart of it, they're getting rid of the strict mandates. There's going to be more flexibility, which should permit hybrid vehicles, at least for the foreseeable future. And here's what gets me excited.
Something's getting you excited.
We make a lot of hybrid vehicles in Canada. That I would have thought that's a good thing. But under the old federal mandates and the current provincial mandates, they're considered bad. So Honda Civic hybrids, Honda CR-V hybrid, the Toyota RAV4 hybrid, the top-selling vehicle in North America, by the way, those are made en masse in Ontario and exported to the United States, as well as sold here in Canada. But under our policies, they're not good enough. You're supposed to buy electric vehicles. We don't manufacture any passenger-friendly or family-friendly passenger vehicles that are electric in Canada. So our provincial policy right now in the legislation, in effect, says you have to buy imported cars. Elbows up.
On the steering wheel. So one clarification I want, because, we all know the problems there are making sure you get the actual facts on things. So Prime Minister Carney comes out, and the main headline most places was, EV mandates are out, they're gone. Then there was another article I read that said, actually what he also did was extend the time to when we have to be all electric vehicles. So it's still in there in some form?
It's hard to know. So it's described as a kind of aspirational, or as it's a target. They've gone from looking at the number of sales to kind of a fleet average of emissions reductions, which is something I recommended on behalf of Energy Futures. I presented to House of Commons Environment Committee in the fall and suggested, you should get rid of these strict mandates that it has to be a particular technology, let the auto manufacturers figure out how to reduce the emissions. And so that is basically what Prime Minister Carney said. And then he said, and our hope is it will result in 75% electric vehicles by 2035. But in detailed briefings, they did not answer what would your definition be of an electric vehicle. Would a hybrid be considered electric? Because it's got some electric components, right? It's got a battery. And the answer wasn't provided. It was, stay tuned, we'll get to you that later this year. So a cynic might suggest that really all of these other things, including the temporary rebates that have been brought back, but on a time-limited basis, and they're scaling down. They started at a maximum $5,000 this year, dropping to $4,000 next year, and then down to zero by 2030. That all of that is just kind of expensive window dressing to maybe somewhat obscure the real story, which is the EV mandates are gone, and we're carrying on.
Maybe it's a smoke screen.
Ironic when you're trying to talk about zero-emission vehicles. But I think ultimately that's what it is. It's a recognition of economic reality, and that this policy was primarily hurting cars made in Canada.
Why didn't the BC government jump on this and say, well, because they have said in the past we should match whatever the feds do, and Carney was very clear, press conference there, they're gone. Why didn't we the next day say, so are ours?
Well, I think maybe Minister Dix hinted at that. He did a great job of kind of talking about all kinds of other things in a scrum with the reporters, so much so that some reporters thought the real story was that BC isn't going to have rebates. We haven't had rebates for about a year and a half now, and they're not coming back. That was already announced last fall by Minister Dix that they're not coming back. So that was the focus of some of the reporting, whereas the real story is, well, what are we going to do with our own made in BC mandates? Minister Dix had said earlier in the fall, like in November, that his preference was there be one standard across Canada, which I would agree with. Really, we're talking about interprovincial trade barriers. Can you think of a bigger barrier than having separate policies for what kind of cars you can drive and sell in 10 different provinces? I mean, it's ridiculous. We're a small car market as it is in Canada. So to think you're going to design different vehicles for different provinces is a bit absurd. But
okay, well, we've got a chance to speak up, maybe, because there may be a provincial election and there may be a federal election, and somehow these complex policies have to be presented in a way that we can cast a vote the way we feel. Thank you, Barry. Back in a moment. It is really interesting how policies can sound really good on paper. Electricity for all. But when government tries to put them into practice, they're often unachievable, or they depend on compromises that threaten other public policies, such as Canada must be more independent, stand on our own 2 feet. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.